What daf you starting from?
We're starting from the bottom of Daf Dalet on base. Okay, we're starting from the Mishnah, which is the second line from the bottom on Daf Dalet on the base. Zok Tehelig Mishnah. We have a three-way machlokes that discusses two separate cases. Haru Bezdin, the Asu Kol Akol or Ruban Alpian. Bezdin paskined wrongfully that something that was Chayiv Kars was mutter, and all of Klal Yisrael acted on it, or Roiv of Klal Yisrael acted on it. That is a textbook case. That is the flagship case. That is the textbook case of. That is the textbook case of Pile Nevshel Tibur. When Daniel Finkel is calling me, I'm not sure if he needs the channel. 1 second. Reb Daniel Agatavach. Okay, perfect. Okay, if it's something that you want to do, then Adarabah. Okay, but I'm actually mamish in the middle of saying shir right now. So let's speak tomorrow. Shkoyach. Bye. Okay, so Zok Tehelig Gemara. Hayu Bezdin Vasukal Akal Ruben Alpian Mavian Par. That's the classic case of Helam Dav Shotziba. What about Avodah Kecham? What if the Aveir that they were matir was Avodah Zarah related? So then the Torah says Mavian Par Viseir. They bring two animals as a carbon, a par and a seir. Diver of Meir, this is the sheet of Reb Meir. So the sheet of Reb Meir is Bezdin brings a par or a par and a seir if it's Avodah Zarah, one for everybody. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yud Beis Shvatim Mavi Yud Beis Purim, Uvavodas Kahavim Mavi Yud Beis Purim U'Shnei Seirim. Rabbi Yehuda said the carbon is not brought by the Bezdin, it's brought by individual Shvatim, and therefore the par al Moshel Tzibur means 12 Purim are brought, one per Shevet. And if it's about Yizara, then there's one per Shevet of Purim and one per Shevet of Seirim. And now we could turn on to Daf Hei Amud Aleph, which is today's Daf. And now we have the third Shita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, it's Yud Gimel Par, because Rabbi Shimon holds not only does each Shevet have to bring one, the Bezdin brings one as well. So Rabbi Shimon combines the Shita of Rabbi Meir and the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda and says there are two sets of karbanos. There's the Bezdin's carbon, and then every Shevet brings them. Therefore, it's going to be Yid Gimel Par. Therefore, it's going to be 13, one for each Shevet, and then one for Bezdin. And if the Aveir was Avodah Zarah, Shloisha Osar Parim, V'Yud Gimel Sir, and Shimon elaborates and he explains Par Useir L'chol Shevet V'Shevet and Par Useir L'Bezdin, and that's how you get 13. So that is the first case. And the first case was when Roiv of Klal Yisrael was Chayte. Now we're going to discuss a different case, and we're also going to look at the three opinions of Reb Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Reb Shimon. Haru Bezdin Vasu Zayin Shvatim Oiruban. So instead of all of Klal Yisrael being Chayte, Roiv of Klal Yisrael was Chayte. Alpian, because of the Bezdin's psak, Meviin Par, they bring a par. Ubavoyz Kechavim Meviin Parus here Divrei Meir. So basically, Zok Reb Meir, if a Roiv of Klal Yisrael is Chayte, they bring the same par Hel B'Mashal Tzibur, but that's again only one, which the Bezdin brings. From Reb Meir, you could be Medayik that Daf give Roiv. If a Miyid of Klal Yisrael were over Avada, there is no par Hel B'Mashal Tzibur at all. That is the sheet of Reb Meir. Divrei Reb Meir, but Reb Yehuda Omer Zayin Shvatim Shechatu. If 7 Shvatim are Chayte, Mevin Zayin Parim. Every single Shevet brings a par. Not only that, Vishari Shvatim Shaloi Chatu, even the 5 remaining Shvatim that did not sin, they also have to bring. Mevin Al Yedei Par. Par. The gears adds a second word par. Mevino de par. Each shevet from the remaining 5 has to bring it al yedea because of the fact that 7 roiv of Klal Yisrael did avera. Now all of Klal Yisrael has to bring a carbon. Sha'af elu shaloi chatu, even the 5 shvatim that did not sin, mevin, they have to bring a carbon because aydei chaytin, because roiv of Klal Yisrael was chaytin. The question arises here: what happens if it was less than 7 shvatim? 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2, or 1? What would Rabbi Yehuda hold? Would Rabbi Yehuda hold dafke if roiv Klal Yisrael was chayte? That's when you say they all have to bring. What if only one shevet was chayte? Would that also be mechayiv all of Klal Yisrael a carbon parhel b'avishal tzibur? And that the Gemara is going to clear on the base, and the Gemara is going to be pushed. Zog to heilige Gemara weiter. What does Rabbi Shimon hold in this case? Rabbi Shimon Omer chesparim. It would be chesparim because 7 for each of the shvatim and 1 for bezdin. L'vayis kachavim chesparim v'chesirin. Par v'seir l'chol shevet v'shevet, a 1 par and seir for each shevet, and par seir lebezdin. So here we're only 7 did it. Zok Reb Shimon, not all of Klal Yisrael has to bring. Dafka those shvatim that were chayte. Okay, gavaltim. Haru bezdin. What happens if it wasn't the bezdin hagadol? It wasn't the bezdin hagadol that paskin, rather it was Haru Bezdin Shel Echad Min HaShvatim. It was a regional Bezdin. One of the Shvatim, their Bezdin alone, paskin that something was mutter. So this is a very local issue. And also Oisei Shevet Alpiyim, and that Shevet followed their Supreme Court. Then Oisei Shevet Hu Chayiv V'Shar Kol HaShvatim Petur and Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Their Rabbi Yehuda hold that for sure only that Shevet is going to be Chayiv. They're not being mechayiv anybody else. This is a local issue. That's Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds even with a regional bezdin, there'd be a chiyuv of par helam dover. But the Chachamim argue, and they say ein chayavin. There's never a chiyuv for a par helam dover shel tzibur, ela al hariyos bezdin agadol uvad. Only if the psak was made by the bezdin agadol, the central bezdin of all of Klal Yisrael. Shenema vel kol adas Yisrael yishku. It has to be Kol Adas Yisrael, all of the Shavatim, the ganze Stada of Klal Yisrael. V'loy Adas Oishay Shevet, we're not only looking at Oishay Shevet. Gebaltik. Zokti Gemara, Tanu Rabban. What would happen in a very unusual case? Yodu Shehoiru V'tohu, they paskind, let's say, on either Chela or a dam that it was mutter, which is a mistake. And then v'to mahayru. Now later on, they ate chelav and they ate dam, but they don't remember which one was paskadon. So they were chayte b'shogim on both. One they ate lahedja because they thought bezdin was matir, and the other one they mixed it up with something else. So let's say the bezdin was matir dam, and they ate dam, but they mixed up shumin and chaylev, and they ate chaylev thinking it was shumin. That's what happened. But 10 years later, when they realized it was a mistake, they didn't remember anymore what was it that the bezdin was matir. Were they matir the chaylev or were they matir the shumin? Now, regardless, they were over, but they don't know specifically what they were over on, what the wrong psak was. Yochel yuchayav, and you might think that there would be a chiyuv to bring a par helam dovashol tzibur. Talmud Leimer v'noida hachatos. It has to be specifically known, specifically what the chet was. It's not enough that the chaytim remember what they did. Rather, they have to know precisely what it was that the bezdin paskin and what was violent. And there's a shaila in the Rishonim what this means. Does this mean that bezdin themselves have to remember, and if the tzibur reminds them, it won't be good enough? Or it means no, they forgot and the tzibur forgot. And nobody remembers exactly what the psak was about. There we have a pasuk that says, unless they know specifically what the helam bezdin was, there's no chiyuv to bring the carbon. Then the brayta goes on. It says asher chatu. So we say chatu shnei shvatim. If 2 shvatim were chayte, mavin shnei par. They bring 2 par. and we're going to soon see this is Rabbi Yehuda, and he's trying to tell you a chiddush that not like Rabbi Meir who holds you only bring one par, you bring two parim. Chatu shloisha mavin shloisha. Oy einoi oimer el chatu shnei yechidim mavin shnei parim. Chatu gimel mavin gimel. Maybe even if only a yochid is chayte, maybe that will also be mechayiv a par helam dover shot tzibor. Dr. Gemara, Talmud Lomer hakahol. It says v'neilam einei hakahol. Hakahol chayiv. Only if a whole kahal, meaning a whole shevet, is chayte, that's when there's a chiyuv. And v'chol kahalu kahal chay. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, not only is one shevet chayiv, once there's a trigger for a chiyuv of a par helam davar, every single shevet needs to bring a carbon. Ketzat chatu shnei shvatim mavin shnei parim. Chatu zayin mavin zayin. V'shar shvatim shaloi chatu, and the other shvatim who were not chayte mavin al yedeim par. Shafilu edul shaloi chatu mavin al yedei chayte. Even the shvatim that weren't chayte, nevertheless, they all have to bring a carbon. Lakach nemar, that's why it says kahal, l'chayiv al kol kahal, the kahal divarabu. That's why it says kahal, to say that every kahal is going to be chayiv. Meaning every shevet has to bring a par helam davar shel tzibor once the chayiv for a par helam davar shel tzibor is triggered. Gewaltig, that is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon argues, and what does Rabbi Shimon say? Zayin shvatim shechatu, if 7 shvatim are chayte, which is roiv klal Yisrael, mavin zayin par, and ubezin mavin ayidei par, so it's a total of 8. Shenemer lamata kahal, v'nemer lamayla kahal. It says kahal where we're talking about bringing the carbon. V'nemar lamayla kahal, and it says v'nela me'enei ha'eda when it's talking about the mistake. It also mentions the word kahal. Ma kahal omer lamayla bezin ima kahal. Just like kahal when it talks about the mistake, it's talking about bezin doing the mistake of the psak, and the kahal doing the chet. So the pasuk is referencing side bez inside the kahal. Af kahal omer lamata, which talks about the chiv to bring the carbon. It's bezin ima kahal. Bezin and the kahal have to bring karbanis, and that is Taka Reb Shimon Shita, that each shevet brings a carbon as well as bezin. Reb Meir was the first sheet in our Mishnah, but it's the third sheet in this brisa, and he says even if zayin shvatim shechatu, there's only one carbon brought, bezin mevin al yedeim par. The hein padurin, and Klal Yisrael doesn't have to bring a par. This is incumbent on bezin to bring. Hein padurin, how does he know it? From the same gzeir shav as Reb Shimon. Nemer kahal lamata, by bringing the carbon. Nemer kahal lamayla, when we're talking about the mistake made. Ma kahal amar lamayla bezin v'loy tzibur. Just like the kahal that's mentioned earlier, Meir learns differently, and he says it's not both. It's only the bezin that we're talking about making a mistake. Af kahal omer lamata. So too when it talks about bringing the carbon, it's bezdin v'loy tzibur. So those are the 3 shitas. The Brisa quotes the same 3 shitas that we have in our Mishnah, but the Brisa introduces another piece of information. Reb Shimon ben Elazar adds a tidbit of information that applies to Reb Meir, and that is, what if it wasn't a pure roiv of Klal Yisrael? Rather, it was chatu shisha shvatim vein ruba shel kahal. Only 6 shvatim were chayte, but they are a very popular shvatim. And if you look at all the Yidden of Klal Yisrael, roiv people in Klal Yisrael were chayte. So what I call it is they won the popular vote, but not the electoral college. Oy zayin, or even if 7 shvatim were chayte, but they have very few members, so they don't even represent roiv of Klal Yisrael. So that's called the electoral college, but not the popular vote. Mevin par, they also bring a par. So Reb Meir holds, even in this case, where you don't have a pure roiv, the bezin still has to bring a par helam dover shel tzibur. Amar mar. So now we're going to analyze this brisa bit by bit. The brisa begins with v'noida hachatos v'loy sheyoydu achoy. We need to know with clarity what was the avera that the bezin paskin was mutter, and that's the avera that The Yidden did, and we need to know that clearly. Otherwise, there's no par helam dover. Mantana, who is the author of this brisa? Omer Rav I can't tell you who is the Tana, but I can tell you who's not the Tana. The Loiker Rabbi Eliezer. This definitely wouldn't jive according to Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanan Omer Rabbi Eliezer, none of Shach, im chelav ochal chayiv, noiser ochal chayiv. What if somebody ate a piece of meat, and we're not sure if it was chelav that he ate, or if it was noiser that he ate, but it was for sure one or the other. Does he bring a carbon chatos? So Rabbi Eliezer, of course he does, because no matter what he ate, he would have been chayiv chatos. Even though we don't know precisely what he ate, the main thing is that we know he was over. So I was in our case as well. What's the difference if we remember exactly what Bezdin said? The fact is, whatever Bezdin did matter, Klal Yisrael was over on. So we don't know how to identify which one it was. Rabbi Ashi Amar, no, Afilu Tamer Rabbi Eliezer, you can hold like Rabbi Eliezer, that by a regular Karban Chatas, you don't need to know exactly what Taver was. The Tanan Amar Rabbi Eliezer Monashech. Sorry, Afilu Tamer Rabbi Eliezer, but Shani Hacha, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that when it comes to a par hel dov shel tibur, there you need to know exactly what happened. Why? They need to know asher chotu aleha, exactly what they were chayt on. So there's a special gilui in the pasuk by par hel dover that they have to have the precise information. Frank Gemara, by a regular carbon chatos, there's a similar phrase. Hashem nami yaksiv asher chata ba. So that also tells you, that should tell you the same way that you need to know exactly what that ver was. That ba isn't to tell you that you need to know exactly what that ver was. That ba you need to tell you that if someone was misasek, there's no chiyuv. What does a misasek mean? On Shabbos, you're not allowed to harvest, you're not allowed to cut a stalk of wheat from the field. But what if there was a piece of wheat there that looked like it was already cut, and you wanted to grab it and pick it up? And you grabbed it and picked it up, but it was really connected. When you grabbed it and picked it up, you tore it out of the ground. So now you made a ktsira, but you weren't even intending to do a ktsira. So you were involved in something completely different. There is not even a chiyuv chat. That's what you learn from Bo. But if you don't know which aver it was, you would still bring a carbon, like Rabbi Eliezer says. But in our case, by Param Dover, the Torah says you need to know specifically what it is. Okay, now let's get back to the three-way machlokes. Rabbi Huda said that each shevet brings its own carbon, even if only Roiv of Klal Yisrael was over. So my time with Rabbi Yehuda. Where does Rabbi Yehuda know his halacha from? We have four words that we could be medaik a chiddush from the word kahal. It doesn't say kahal four times; it only says it twice. But in each time it says hakahal. Ksiv kahal hakahal, kahal hakahal. It says in Nelam. Let's look at the psukim inside so we have clarity. So I'm just scrolling up to where the pasuk is quoted. Ve'im kol adash Yisrael yeshku v'nelam davar me'enei hakahol. It could have said v'nelam davar me'enei kahol. Why me'enei hakahol? The same thing is in the next pasuk. V'noy da'achatos asher chatu aleh v'hikriv hakahol par ben bakar. It could have said v'hikriv kahol par. But both those words have the extra hey idea, which gives us four limudim to extract. So zokt the Gemara as follows: Chad lechayiv al kol kal v'kal. One kal is to tell us that every shevet has to bring its own carbon, which is what Rabbi Yehuda Shita is in our Mishnah. The chad ra tuluya bebezdin umasa toli bekal. At the beginning of the Masechta, we learned that if Bezdin Paskin's wrong, and they themselves do the Avera, but not the Tzibur, there's no Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. It's only if Bezdin Paskins and the Tzibur violates. That's where this carbon is brought. How do you know that from? Because V'chad Lo'ira Tluya Bebezdin Umayta Tluya Bekal. So that's the second kal. The third kal is V'chad L'Greira. How do you know that if 7 Shvatim were Chayte, that all 12 Shvatim have to bring? They get nochish left. That's the third kal. The chad and the fourth kal is l'shevet she'asa b'yiras bezdin. If a shevet does an avera based on not the central bezdin paskening wrongfully, but their own bezdin paskening wrongfully, they will also bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. It's these four limudim that Rabbi Yehuda extracts from the four extra kahals. Rab Shimon, Reb Shimon, who argues on Rabbi Yehuda, and he says that even Bezdin has to bring, so it's one per Shevet plus Bezdin, he will learn Tlosa Kaliksi. We only have three extras because the Kahal Akol of Anela Me'ene Akol, that's not extra. As he explains, Rav Shimon Tlosa Kaliksi, Hakahol, and Kol Hakahol. But Me'ene Akol, which is in the first pasuk, when it says Vanilla Me'ene Akol, that's Urcha de Kron. That's a normal way the Torah expresses itself. Ki the Amri Inchi, like the Velt says, Me'eni de Planya, Yenim's eyes. So the eyes of the Kahal, that's not an extra hay. That's a normal way of speech. So therefore I only have three Lamudim. So what will we do with these three Lamudim? So Rab Shimon says, Chad L'chayiv al kol kal v'kal. One is to tell us that every Shevet has to bring a carbon, which in that respect he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. And the two remaining he uses for Gzeir Shava. Utrei Achrini is to make the Gzeir Shava, as he already explained in the Brisa earlier. Never Lamata Kahal, Never Lamala Kahal, Mal Halon Bez and Ima Kahal, Avkan Bez and Ima Kahal. Reb Meir, he only has two extras because he holds there's no question ever why there's a Heyadi. Reb Meir Kahal HaKal Dorish. So he only has two words Kahal. Hilchach Trei Kahal Ksivi, and he uses them for Gzeir Shava, as the Bryce explained as well. Miboyalei l'nemer lamata kahal l'nemer l'mayla kahal malalon bezin v'loy tzibur avkan bezin v'loy tzibur. That's how our mayor knows that only the bezin brings a carbon, not the tzibur. If there's only one carbon brought for all of Klal Yisrael. And then we have the last shita, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who said that if you only have either the popular vote or you only have the electoral college vote, you'll still bring it. How does he know that? My timer. Because Ksiv says in the pasuk, if only part of the Eda, from part of the Eda, Alma miyuta, the Ksiv me'ene. But the problem is there's another pasuk. Everybody did the Avera. So is it just a small portion, or is it right? Remember the Ruba in the Yutalai. Okay, so how do you make these two still? Okay, so Asuva ve'Ruba shel kahal oy zayin afal pishay Ruba shel kahal chayav. What type of roiv are we talking about? Even a shvacha roiv, even if it's only roiv shvatim, or if it's only roiv akol, but not the other, that roiv will also qualify and be mechayiv a carbon par halam davar shel tzibur. The Baruch Hashem, we finished Daf Hey Amud Aleph, and now we're going to turn to Amud Beis. Rab Shimon and Rab Meir. Rab Shimon and Rab Meir, they hold the Hayrah to leave a bezin. See, they don't have the extra kahal that we had for Rab Yehuda to tell us that Hayrah is Tliba Bezin and the Ma'is is Tliba Kahal. So where do they know it from? Rab Shimon and Rab Meir, the Hayrah Tliba Bezin, the Ma'is is Tliba Kahal. We know who. How will they know that? Omar Abaye, the Omar Krah, from a different pasuk. It says by the Avera of Avodah Zarah. So that's mashma. It's me'ene ha'eda necessary. It's the eda that did the avera, not the bezin. Rav Amar, from a different pasuk, it says milachala am b'shkaga. The did the shoy. Utricha, you need Sai Rava's pasuk and Sai Abayi's pasuk. Either one alone wouldn't tell us whatever we need to know. The ikas of Rachmana v'haya ime einaya edan nesalishkaga. If we only had the pasuk of Abaye, I would have thought afilu miyuta. Even if only a meat of Klal Yisrael did it, it would be trigger a chiyuv, and that's not true. Lahachik said l'chala mishkaga. You need roiv because of l'chala mishkaga. Havamina ada of the bezdin bahadei ruba. You would think bezdin also has to do that there. And therefore you need both. The says that it doesn't include bezdin, but l'chol mishkaga means you need roiv of Klal Yisrael. Frank the Gemara, how could you bring a raya from these psukim to a standard par helam davar shel tzibor? These psukim are not talking about a stam par helam davar. These are speaking about the parents here of Avodah Zarah. It says the word Me'ene by the Parsha of Avodah Zarah. It says the word Me'ene by Har Par Halam Davar. And from that Gzeir Shava, we learned that the same halacha that we learned by the Avodah Zarah, that it has to be Roiv the Tzibur and not Bezdin, that same halacha applies to Par Halam Davar. Gewaltig. Now we're going to go on to Rabbi Yehuda's halacha, his chiddush, that Haru Bezdin shall Echad. What if the Bezdin of only one Shevet wrongfully was mater a chi of kars, and only that Shevet was labor? That Shevet brings their own private par halam davar. That's what Rabbi Yehuda taught us. So Frank the Gemara, the following shaila. The Gemara wants to ponder an interesting shaila. Yibaylu. What happens if only Shevet Echad did Avera, but it wasn't their Bezdin that was mater, it was the Bezdin Agadol. So Shevet Echad Rabbi Yehuda, by Ross Bezdin Agadol, would that trigger a par helam davar shel tzibur for all of Klal Yisrael? Mi ma'isi shar shvatim erloi. If you look at the actual Bryce and the actual Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is discussing when 7 shvatim did the avera, all 12 shvatim bring it. But would that halacha apply to even if only one shevet did avera? What's the shaila? Mi amrina on shiva shvatim udamaisi. Dafka shiva shvatim, which is what the case Rabbi Yehuda is talking about. So dafka, if there's 7 shvatim udamaisi, Shar Shvatim Badayu, that they will trigger that all the other Shvatim have to bring a parallel number. We should the Ikaruba, because there's Roiv of Klal Yisrael who was Chayte. Aval Chad Shevet, but if only one Shevet was Chayte, the Lekaruba, where there's no Roiv Loi, there they doesn't trigger a Chi of parallel number. Oidel or maybe Loishna. So that is a Shaila. So you might ask, if Rabbi Yehuda holds even one Shevet could trigger a chiyuv parallel davar, so why in the Mishnah does he talk about 7 shvatim? He should have said a bigger chiddush, even with one shevet. And this is Rashi's kash on the Mishnah. And Rashi answers, because Rabbi Yehuda was just responding to Reb Meir. Reb Meir said if 7 do it, because Reb Meir holds you need 7. So Rabbi Yehuda was responding to Reb Meir, because he wasn't talking about one. He was just trying to argue with Reb Meir to say that you don't only bring one carbon for Bezin, all the shvatim have to bring a carbon. That was his point. So he stuck to the same case as Reb Meir. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda would hold the same halacha even if only one shevet was chayte. So that is the shaila. So the Gemara attempts to bring a raya toshma from a brisa. The brisa asks the following question: Ma hein mavi. We don't know what the case is, but we just know the opinions, and we'll have to figure out what the case is. Ma hein mavi. What exactly do they bring as a carbon? Par echad, one par. This is the Tanakama. So let's try to figure out what the case of this brisa is. It's awesome. So, B'mai asking, what is the case? If the case was where 7 shvatim were chayte, that can be, because we know Reb Shimon holds if 7 shvatim were chayte, 7 plus 1 you have to bring for everybody. Reb Shimon Tamanya boy. Reb Shimon holds at 7 plus 1, it'll be 8. As a matter of fact, Reb Shimon really will hold, it'll be all 12. Ella the choto shevet. Rather, you have to say the cases that only one shevet did avera, which is exactly the case that we're pondering. And Reb Shimon holds you need to bring 2, and then Tanakama holds you need to bring 1. So let's think about this. Reb Shimon, 1 second. B'may asking, ilam shechatu shiva, Reb Shimon t'manya boy. Ela the choto shevet. You'll have to say that there's only one shevet who did avera. Now the question is, what type of bezdin paskin wrongfully here? If it's only the local bezdin, well, Reb Shimon Leslie, Reb Shimon holds there's no par halam davar at all. The only one who holds you can bring a par halam davar is Rabbi Yehuda, so it can't be that case either. Ella lab ras bezdin agod. The case that the Bryson must be talking about is when the bezdin agod will paskin for everybody that's mutter and only one shevet asur. And Reb Shimon holds if only one shevet did it, so that one shevet brings 2 karbanos, because 1 for the shevet and 1 for bezdin. The Tanakama who says dafka 1 mani, who would be the Tanakama? Inema Reb Meir. If you want to say the Tanakama is Reb Meir, it can't be. Haruma boy. Reb Meir holds until Roiv Klal Yisrael was chayte, there is no par halam davar, and we're talking about a case where only one shevet was chayte. Elolav Rabbi Yehuda. It has to be Rabbi Yehuda. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if only one shevet was chayte, they only bring 1 carbon. So we have a right or a shaila that if only one shevet was chayte, they only bring 1 carbon. Zok Gemara, no, maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's another case. This Bryce is talking about. Amri Hacha b'Maya Skinon, Kagoin Shechatu Shisha Shvatim, Vein Ruben Shel Kahal. Maybe this Machloikis and this Brisa is the case of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, the Tanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Omer, Nishmoi, Chatu Shisha Vein Ruben Shel Kahal, or Shiva Afal Bisha Ein Ruben Shel Kahal, Maviin Par. So the Brisa, let's go back to the Brisa. Mahi Maviin, in the case where you didn't have a full Roiv, you either had only Roiv Shvatim or Roiv Noshim. Mahi Maviin Par Echad, you bring one par only. And who would this be going like? It would be going like Reb Meir. He holds you only bring one par because you have a Roiv but not a full Roiv. So you bring one par for the Bezdin. Reb Shimon Omer, you bring Shnei par. You would bring Shnei par, even though normally you bring for the all of Klal has to bring, but since this was a Shvach Roiv, you have one par for all of Klal Yisrael and one par for the Bezdin. So there's no Raya from there. So the Gemara tries to bring another Raya. Zog to Gemara, Tashema. We have another Raya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. This is a Brisa. This is a very easy Raya because the Raya is from a Mufurish Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Shevet also by dos bezdinoi oisai shevet chayim v'shar kol shvatim pturim. That's what our Mishnah says. But this Brisa adds in uvehayros bezin agadol afilu shar shvatim chayovim. Black and white. If bezin agadol paskined wrongfully and only one shevet was over, afilu shar shvatim chayovim, they have to bring 12 karbanos. Shmamina. So we have a beautiful proof from a Mefurish Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda is mechayiv every shevet a carbon, even though only one shevet violated. Amar Bashi, Masnisa Namideka. If you look at our Mishnah carefully and you analyze Rabbi Yehuda's words, you'll be able to deduce the same halacha. The Katani, in the case where only the regional Bezdin made the mistake, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? V'asa oiseh shevet al piem, and only one shevet, that shevet did the iser. Oiseh shevet chayiv, that shevet's chayiv. Now, that's all Rabbi Yehuda say. Could have stopped right there. Because why would I think that any other shevet would be chayiv? Of course, only this shevet is chayiv. It's a local issue. But Rabbi Yehuda sticks in extra words in his opinion in the Mishnah. And he says, the shar kol shvatim pturim. That's totally redundant. Lama lila misno shar shvatim pturim. Why in the world does Rabbi Yehuda have to speak that out? Hatana oisai shevet chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda said that shevet will be chayiv. So obviously, the chiv with the Tana oisai shevet chayiv, memeli yadana shar shvatim pturim. So it's obvious all the shvatim will be butter. So why did Rabbi Yehuda stick it again with shar shvatim pturim? Because he wanted to signal to us that we should make a diak. Elahakamash malon the bayras bezdinoi who the shar shvatim pturim. You know in shar shvatim pturim only if it was a local bezdin that paskin. Amal bayras bezdin agadol. But if the Bezdin Agadol paskined and only one shevet acted on it, then afilu shar shvotim chayovim. Shmamino. So we now have proof positive that Rabbi Yehuda holds that even if only one shevet were chayte and the hayra was done by the Bezdin Agadol, every shevet needs to bring a parallel of Davar Shal Tzibor. You have 12 karbanos. Zoktimar. Okay, now we know what Rabbi Yehuda holds. But now let's see what Rabbi Shimon holds, because Rabbi Shimon also said you bring one per shevet, but he added, in addition to that, Bezdin brings one as well. So what would he hold if only one shevet was chayte? Ibaylu shevet echad sha'asa bayras Bezdin Agadol Reb Shimon mi'maisi yodam. Zokimar Toshma. Let's see if we bring a raya from the same brayso that we were discussing earlier. Mahe mevin par echad Reb Shimon Omer shnei par. B'may eskinon. Ilay mishachatu shiva. If it's speaking where 7, where a roiv was chayte, shnei parim. Reb Shimon wouldn't say you bring shnei parim. Shmoina parim boy. He would say it would be 8, at least 8, because 7 for those shvatim plus 1 for Bezdin. Elo, the case must be is the chata shevet echad. Only one shevet were chayte. Uvamai. Ileva by Ross Bezdinoi. If it was only the psak of the local Bezdin from that shevet, Rabbi Shimon Leslie. Rabbi Shimon holds that there's no carbon there at all. It was only Rabbi Yehuda who says that brings a carbon. Elo, you know what the case must be of the brisa? And Rabbi Shimon says you bring 2 karbanos. So you have a raya that only that shevet brings a carbon. How could you say that? Tanakama Mali. Who's going to be the Tanakama? Reb Meir. If it's going to be Reb Meir, Haruba boy. He wouldn't say you bring 1 part. You bring 0 part. because at least Rav of Klai will have to be chayte in order to trigger it. And here Rabbi Yehuda, we've already proven that Shar Shvatim Nami Maisu. They would bring 12 karbanas. So we're forced to say, like we said earlier, that Hamani Rab Shimon ben Elazari. We would have to say that the case was where you didn't have a real Rav. You either had Rav Shvatim or Rav people, and it was a modern type of Rav. And there, Reb Meir holds you would still bring one par, and Reb Shimon holds you would bring two parim. So we don't have a raya according to Reb Shimon yet. Okay? Tashma, let's try to bring a raya. The Chachamim argued on Rabbi Yehuda, and they said if it was a local bezin that paskin, but wrongfully, there's no par helam dover at all. So man Chachamim, who are these Chachamim? Our Mishnah doesn't say who it is. So let's use a process of elimination. If you consider this Reb Meir, Ruba boy, even if bezin agadol paskin, you still wouldn't be any chiyuv because he also need Rav Klal Yisrael to do the chait. And a lot of Reb Shimon, the Chachamim that are arguing on Reb Yehuda, must be Reb Shimon. Shemamina, so you see clearly from Reb Shimon that even if the Hairos Bezin Agadol, only one Shevet would bring it, the Shevet that did the Avera. So you see clearly, if we go through a list, Reb Meir holds you always only ever bring one carbon, and that's only if Rav Klal Yisrael or Chayte. Reb Shimon holds that even if one Shevet was Chayte, they would also bring a carbon parallel Domshal Tzibur, but only one, not everybody would have to bring. And if Rav Klal Yisrael were Chayte, then all of Klal Yisrael has to bring a parallel lover plus the best. Rabbi Yehuda holds, even if one Shevet was Chayte, all of the 12 Shvatim have to bring a par Helam Domshal Tzibur, but Bezin does not bring it. Gewaltig, Zog der Heilige Gemara weiter. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, Shevet Echad Deikri Kahal Minolu. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are the only one who says that the entire Shevet, each Kahal, brings its own carbon. How do they know that Kahal means Shevet? Maybe Kahal means all of Klal Yisrael. So how do you know that each Shevet has to bring their own carbon? How do you see that from the word Kahal? Because that's what they said. I'll call Kahal Kahal. Every Kahal, every Shevet. How do they know that a Kahal means Shevet? Rabbi Shimon, Shevet Echad Ikri Kahal Minolu. Army Dr. Mordech, it says in the Pasuk, after when they're coming back to the base of Mikdash, it says, Vayama Yoshavat V'Kal Yehuda Yerushalayim. Yoshavat stood up amongst the Kahal of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. So we are referring to Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda alone, as a Kahal. So there you see, one Shevet could be a Kahal. Now the Gemara goes off on a little tangent by investigating the rest of the pasuk. Where were they standing? Noicha Chatzar based Hashem Hachadosh, in front of the new Chatzar. It wasn't the new Chatzar. It was the same base of Mikdash that was around for a long time. Umay Chadasha, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shechichu Devarim VaAmru. They were mechadish a new halacha, a new gzeira that full yoim al yikonis b'machan elevia. They no longer allowed that full yoim, somebody who would toil from his tumah, but he still didn't wait till nightfall, he may not enter the machan elevia. But our raya is from the fact that we're referring to the Kal Yehuda. Shevet Yehuda is called a Kal. But frank the Gemara, it's Yehuda of Yerushalayim. And we know Yerushalayim didn't exclusively belong to Yehuda. Yerushalayim belonged to Binyamin as well. So maybe Dafka Yehuda of Yerushalayim, maybe two Shvatim can be called a Kahal. But who said one Shevet by itself can be called a Kahal? So Zog to Gemara, Maskim lo Rabacha Bayakab Bimai, Dilma Shiny Yerushalayim, Davanami Binyamin. And there's two Shvatim there. We're going to refer to a different pasuk. When Yaakov was dying, he called his children together and he said, I want you to know, Kindalach, many, many years ago, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a promise to me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me many years ago, Hinini mafrecha v'rbisicha unisaticha l'chalabim. Hashem promised that it will make me into a kahal. Now, at that point, all of the Shvatim were born, except for Binyamin. Manis Yad Lahishaita. So which child was that broch of Kahal referring to? Binyamin. Shemamina. So you see, one Shevet Binyamin alone is called a Kahal. Hachi Gamar. So Shemamina Hachi Gamar. This is what the Torah is saying. Misyad Lachashta Kahal Achrina. You can have a new child a new Shevet, Binyamin, and he will be a new Kahal to add to your 11 Kahals that you have already. Omer Rab Shabo, Rab Kahana, who said that's what it means? Maybe this is what Hashem was promising Yaakov. Lechimis Yalad Lach Binyamin, who the Hava Yud Bei Shvatim, Divis Karyas Kahal. Maybe because Baruch is not going to give you a Kahal because you need 12 Shvatim to be a Kahal. And when you get your 12th Shevet Binyamin, then all of you as a group will be called a Kahal. Amalei, that can't be. Because now because if that's how you learn the Pasuk, then you're going to have to say that you need a minimum of 12 Shvatim to be a Kahal. You're telling me that 11 Shvatim was not called a Kahal? That can't be, because on the previous Raya, where it said the Kahal Yehuda Yerushalayim, L'chol HaPachas we had a Raya that 2 Shvatim is a Kahal, Yehuda ben Yamin. So how could you say that the Kahal was only completed after the 12th child was born? So it must be Binyamin, one Shevet on his own would be called a Kahal. Develop. Tanya Rab Shimon Omer, Ma Talmud Loimer, in the pasuk where it talks about when the Levim were being anointed with their kedusha, the Torah talks about 2 parim that are brought. One was a chatos and one was an oil. Upar Sheni ben Bakar tikach lechatos. Now, why did they upar Sheni? We know there's 2 parim over here. Im lelame shem shnayim. If the Torah instructed those into 2 separate parim, we know there were 2 parim. But like for remember, the pasuk says, "V'asas echad chatos v'sechad oil l'Hashem." So obviously there's 2 korbanos here. So why are we calling it parasheni? It's like we're comparing the 2. You would have thought that the korban chatos that they're bringing, the kohanim are allowed to eat. You might think the kohanim can eat them like every other korban chatos that the kohen can eat. Talmud loimer or parasheni lo'oilo, we're comparing this chatos to the oilo. Ma oilo loy nechelos. Just like a korban oilo is not eaten by anybody. It's burnt completely up in his bayach. Turning on to Daf Vav Amar Aleph. So too this chatos was not eaten. There's a similar korban as well that was a chatos that was not eaten. Amr Rabbi Yosy, the pasuk in Ezra tells us that when Klal Yisrael came back from Golus, Haboim Bi'ashevi Hagoyla, when they came back from the Goyla, Hikrivu Oilois Ladekei Yisrael, they brought Oilois to Hashem. Parim Shnei Masar, there were 12 parim, and let's have a look at the pasuk inside. Parim Shnei Masar. I'll call Yisrael on all of Klal Yisrael. Elim Tishim V'Shisha, 96 rams. Kavasim sheep, Shivim V'Shiva, 77. Sefira Chatois and Chatois of birds, Shnei Masar, 12. Hakoil Oilo L'Shem. They were all oilos, which is confusing because clearly they're chatas, not an oilo. So Frank the Gemara, Hakol Oilos Hakadaitach, Abshur Shechatas Oilo. Could a chatas be an oilo? Two different kabbanas. Ella Hakoil Ki Oilo. We're just comparing the chatos to an oil to tell us that this particular chatos was not eaten by the kayanim, even though others are. This wasn't. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zoich to finish Dafei, and Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach. Tomorrow we're going to do Dafov. Tomorrow after Shachris at 9:00, there's going to be a beautiful siyum on the Avodah Zarah. Everybody's invited to attend. Everyone should have a good day, a bench to vach.
Get off.
But if you're getting fresh, then I would take a fresh milk. The only if you're getting